Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, this is informal, and I definitely want to hear from all of you as we go through this. I've broken this into kind of 3 segments. I'm not sure if we'll get to the last one, but I'm happy to share my slides or discuss further with anybody who wanted to get in touch with me about that one if we don't get there. But kind of starting off with how COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd really foundationally shifted the way that we're going to teach policing probably forever, and frankly, I hope forever, because I think it's not going to be good enough anymore to not cover these topics and to not infuse our policing class with discussions of racial injustice, racial inequity. So I think that moving forward, we really just have to make this the new way that policing is taught. Second, and then afterward, discussing tackling and managing emotionally charged topics in the classroom. I know that this is really something that especially brand new faculty struggle with or fear, is the controversy, or the class discussion on something controversial. There's a lot of fear kind of wrapped up in that, and so I have a couple of kind of general tips for maybe handling that. And then again, wanting to hear from you for any ideas that you have along those lines as well. And then if we get to it, the idea of lecturing versus facilitating. And this is tied up kind of with this first one, moving away from kind of the, lecture-based format where we're gearing up for, an upcoming multiple choice test. So we kind of focus on key terms and lecture, and do we want to build in more kind of facilitation types of activities, debates and discussions, and just trying to get students engaged with these topics that way. So section 1, kind of the basic sort of prototypical teaching class is pretty, there's a lot of similarities. Of course, everybody teaches a little bit differently, but the historical narrative tends to kind of situate the origin of policing, with the London Metropolitan Police, which then was kind of imported over here in the northeastern cities. They kind of as policing developed, we learn about figures like Vollmer and Wilson. We learn about how the 1960s civil rights movement changed policing, and then we learn about kind of the 9/11 Homeland Security type of thing. So technology, again, sort of a largely standard kind of discussion of how technology has developed, from whistles and call box keys all the way up now to mobile data terminals, conductive energy devices, body-worn cameras, and so forth. So these are kind of the standard, policing items that would be covered in a curriculum. None of it is necessarily incorrect, but it's just sort of a whitewashed version of policing that really leaves out a lot of the controversial aspects, a lot of the depth and the detail and the nuance, the ways that policing really has been integral to society for generations, for hundreds, for a really long time. So, how has this institution really developed alongside society? How does it reflect society? How does it impact society? How is there kind of this symbiotic relationship between the injustices and the biases that you see in society at large?
You gonna need help?
Sorry, I'm hearing somebody talking. Is somebody trying to get my attention? I guess not.
No, you're okay. Move ahead.
And so this, this relationship between police and society in general, and, why do we see problems in policing? I always tell my students we see problems in policing because we have problems in society. And so any institution is going to reflect the larger society that it is in. You know, policing is really about the status quo. It's about keeping things the way they are. And you know, this is not a radical institution. This is not an institution of major social change. This is an institution that is intended to do whatever this is, you know, society tells it to do, which in this case is a kind of white dominated society. And so where, you know, that's kind of lost, I think, in a lot of these discussions. And then ultimately, then it also because of that, it fails to answer questions that are really probably on students' minds right now. They're coming into the classroom wondering, you know, how do these killings happen? Like, why? What is happening here? What's going on? How do so few officers you know, get charged criminally for killing? Why are they so rarely convicted? There's nothing in this sort of whitewashed version of policing, the policing curriculum, that allows them to answer those questions. You know, they're gonna show up with really important, timely, emotionally weighty questions, and they're not gonna get answers from, you know, the standard rundown of a policing curriculum. And, you know, there's also a danger that, you know, kind of painting the 1960s civil rights movement as sort of the end of racism in this country. You know, Black Americans finally got some political power. They were finally, you know, we got some laws into place to protect them. And, you know, a lot of people did sort of wake up during that time period and realize that this isn't okay. And, you know, the danger there, of course, is in painting racism as if it's a thing of the past, that, you know, that's all gone now. And then, you know, by definition, policing must be race neutral, right? If racism is no longer so prevalent. But then again, that fails to answer the question that might be kind of burning on students' minds as they come in. Why are there still so many Black protests against police? Why do we even have a Black Lives Matter movement? Like, why, you know, what's this all about? And so, you know, again, these are the types of things that students are probably going to bring with them into the classroom. And, you know, they need a curriculum that's going to speak to those questions. It's going to link up with that and allow them to get into answering those. And then there's just a kind of growing appetite in general for discussions about racial justice. You know, you see universities adding new race classes to their curriculum. You know, my department is among them. We have a brand new race in the criminal justice system class that we've added. And so this is just becoming, you know, more and more something that is not only okay to talk about. You know, it has been kind of taboo in the past, but now it is not only okay, but it's really expected. And, you know, this is all, of course, sitting up against the backdrop of COVID, which laid bare those very stark racial inequities just across every sector, from the labor market to housing to healthcare, and like all of it just, you know, kind of COVID just sort of tore the cover right off of that. And, you know, that's, you know, we're confronting some really horrible realities. You know, of course, and then George Floyd's shockingly brazen murder, really just kind of those two things combined really laid the groundwork for such a massive social shift. And this, you know, is kind of BLM solidified as a national movement. You know, they are a force now. And so, you know, and then of course, you know, talked about less than it should be, but still getting, you know, attention in its own right, racism and hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as well, as we've seen, you know, for things like, you know, blaming them for COVID and just hate crimes against that group that are, so we've kind of setting the scene here with these larger social movements that are happening, and these are going to trickle into the classroom. They're going to really cause us to reevaluate how we teach probably all of our criminal justice courses, but policing is my topic today. So, but how we teach policing in colleges and universities. And, I fear that business as usual would just make us look very tone deaf. We'd look like we live under a rock and we don't really have any idea what's happening, or that we're just ignoring it, which would really threaten our credibility and legitimacy, as a social institution dedicated to bettering our younger generations, toward educating them and sharing our knowledge with them. If we just sort of ignore what's happening and say, I'm just going to kind of teach from my textbook and play it safe here, I think that's a damaging approach. And it's really going to produce college and university graduates who really don't have any critical thinking skills. They're not going to gain an appreciation for nuance. They're not going to hear alternative viewpoints that maybe challenge some of the preconceived notions they come into the classroom with, which, aside from delivering content, instructors and professors in colleges and universities, like, that's why we exist. Yes, we exist to provide information, to teach, our students things, but we also exist to try to get them to think in a particular way, to enhance their questioning skills, to enhance their curiosity, to feed their curiosity, to get them to see the world in a kind of a three-dimensional sort of way, and not just allow them to come in with burning questions and not answer their questions, or to come in with assumptions, preconceived notions, and never challenge those, or ask them to challenge them themselves. So that just, this is really going to further our mission as, an institution that is supposed to be helping students develop their not just knowledge base, but their thinking skills. And then meeting students where they're at. It really does a disservice to students of all races to fail to address racial discrimination in policing classes. It's leaving out students of color. Essentially, they're just, their histories and their stories are just not there at all. And then, again, white students may come in perhaps with some gaps in their knowledge base. They might have questions or preconceived notions that they need answered as well. And where better to answer them than the classroom? I would much rather they get their answers from us than from, the internet, social media. Who knows what they're going to find out there. And so, in these we really have an obligation to address these hard questions in the classroom. And then there's also a benefit for you starting the discussion, for us as professors, lecturers, being the ones to kind of start the conversation. And, I'm going to get to this a little bit more in the next section, but, basically, if you start it first, you're ahead of the game. You're not going to get caught off guard by somebody throwing a question at you. You're kind of playing it safe. You've got your thing going on. Oh, okay. I've got some feedback now. Could everybody make sure they're muted? Thank you. Yeah, so just anticipating the discussion. Whoever starts the discussion kind of has, control over the narrative, and, you want that person to be you. So this is a way, again, I'm going to kind of get at that, but in the next section, but, it's also a way for you to continue to be the one kind of in control of the conversation, and not let things spiral out of control. A lot of this gets into very, we're often not comfortable going down this road. And, I think that it's important to kind of pause for a second and think that it's okay to say, I don't know. This is something that nobody ever told me. And, I'll be honest, I only fairly recently figured out that, the sky doesn't fall when you admit to your students that, you don't actually have an answer to a particular question. And so it's, you know, it's perfectly okay to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, or, you know, that's a really complicated topic, you know, or even, you know, even to, you know, open it up to the class. I've done that before. If I don't have a solid answer or any answer to a question, but I think it's a good question, you know, ask somebody else in the class if they could, you know, provide some input. You know, I think that's a great way to kind of get class discussion going. It humanizes you, quite to the contrary of what many of us might fear, that it makes us look weak or, you know, incapable. But I think what it does is kind of prove to your students that you're human too, that, you know, you're not a machine that just spits out answers. And so, you know, kind of play on your strengths, show your students where you shine, but don't be afraid to get into some territory that you are not going to have complete subject mastery of. It's okay if, you know, if you have to say that. And then kind of wrapping up this section with a mention of positionality. You know, a lot of times, you know, confronting contemporary controversies in policing, or just race discussions in general, can be very daunting. People are just often not comfortable with it at all, especially in a room full of strangers. And so, you know, everybody's maybe kind of thinking, am I going to say the wrong thing? Will I offend someone? Am I going to be judged for the things that I say or the things that I believe? And so, you know, us as the professors are not, and instructors are not by any means immune from that. You know, your students are probably thinking it, and you probably are too. So, you know, I just always recommend kind of start by being honest with yourself and your comfort level. How do you feel talking about race as it pertains to policing, you know, with people kind of your same race or of other people of other different races? You know, do you tend to alter the way that you talk when you're with people of other races? So what, you know, kind of just having something of a conversation with yourself and admitting where you are at. And it's okay if you're not kind of there yet. It's perfectly fine. Start where you're comfortable. If you need to avoid certain topics at first because you haven't quite gotten there yet, emotionally, leave them out for now. You can always build them in as you get more comfortable with this. I don't recommend jumping into the deep end here. Just gradually build that comfort zone up. You know, push yourself and you know, test yourself a little bit more and a little bit more, and you know, you'll find your comfort zone expanding gradually, and that's really the way you want it. And then, you know, you're not panicking if something comes up. You're not at risk of just sort of spouting out or freezing up or anything like that. Lean on students. You know, definitely never call them out by race or anything like that. Of course, you know that. But open up a question. You know, see if students do want to chime in. You know, you might hear. You know, you might be able to have a controversial a conversation about a controversial topic with you actually saying relatively little and you just sort of guiding it so that your students are the ones that are really kind of carrying the weight of that discussion. And so that takes a lot of the pressure off of you. And then defining your terms, setting ground rules, and then defining your terms, making sure that, you know, when you use a term like white privilege or defund the police, you know, tell students like what it means to you, and so that everybody can kind of be on the same page, and they're not, you know, you just avoid unnecessary confusion and possible discord for that. So this is where I wanted to open it up to the group. I'd love to hear what, you know, what other people are doing. So what are you doing to your policing curriculum or other curriculum if you're not currently, and then what new elements are you adding or dropping?
And Jacinta, I'll say Jeffrey Bryson's got his hand up, so I want to make sure
Oh.
that that wasn't by mistake. Jeffrey, if you want to come off mute or turn your camera on and come off mute, you can do that to make a comment or ask a question. And then just remind everybody that there's icons across the top of your screen here in Microsoft Teams. One of those is like a little bubble that shows that actually says, as you hover over it, show conversation. Some of you are already putting questions or comments in the chat, but feel free to do that throughout today. And certainly now's the time to do that. And that way we can address questions if you don't want to come off mute and say anything. So Jeffrey, if you want to say anything or ask a question, that sort of thing, feel free to do that now.
Okay. I'm actually on my phone because I had to take my cat to the vet, so I don't have the chat function. But
Okay.
or I would have typed it in the chat. But where I teach, there are some of us that believe that there are a few racist cops out there, and so we just need to take care of them. And then there's some of us who believe that there truly is structural racism within policing. So I was wondering if you could address maybe that phenomenon or those different perspectives.
You actually just stole a point from later in my discussion. I say both, and I think that, and this is it's something that I do plan to address in more detail. So if you don't mind me being a little bit glossing over at the moment, but I think there is a way for us to understand both sides of that. And that's not to be wishy-washy. That's not to be, hypocritical. But both of those have some truth to them. The bad apple explanation is not sufficient, but it's also true that, kind of like crime, bad behavior among police officers is often disproportionately concentrated among certain people who repeatedly offend. And so it is true that you have a lot of police officers who go their entire career doing good work out in the community. But it is also true that on a structural level, there are systematic problems that end up landing on the shoulders of Black and Brown Americans. And so I think that with care and concern and a full explanation, I think you can tell students that both of these kind of are coexisting.
Jacinta, there's another question in the comments, and I don't know if you can see the comment conversation as well, but and I apologize if I'm saying this name wrong, but Sharoni Blunt obviously teaches in Georgia, and she mentioned that they have voted to censor American history. Basically, they've banned any discussion of race, racial inequality, racism, white privilege, a lot of these things in the classroom that we want to have discussions about. And she said, do you have any suggestions on, things where it's going to make it hard to facilitate class discussions, such as the case of George Floyd or any other things that are controversial?
Yeah, I'm really sorry for people facing that. I guess I would recommend looking into the law specifically. How does it really impact the classroom? Sometimes, thankfully, laws like that are more symbolic. And so perhaps there are enough sort of loopholes and wiggle room in the law that actually doesn't technically ban it. But yeah, I mean, if you, or, couching your discussion in more of a general social justice where you discuss, where you, maybe then you can say, I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about, other things as well. But yeah, they would, I honestly, I'm taking my own advice here and saying, I don't know how these new restrictions are going to impact, the things that we're talking about here today.
And then I saw one other question or comment just come through that is someone wanting to add something about the use of technology in policing. Obviously, body cams is something that a lot of people talk about. And this individual said felt like CJ teaching is slow implementing change as technology is changing so fast. Any thoughts on that? Maybe the way that in teaching you can kind of keep up with the changes in technology.
Oh, and I just found the chat function. There it is. All right, now I'm with you. Okay. Yeah, technology. I guess this is. I'm going to offer a brief comment there because I want to stay focused. But yeah, technology and policing is definitely changing. The use of data is changing. Data-driven policing is also a really good opportunity to bring in a critical thinking element as well. When we use, hotspots policing, or when we use, other forms like predictive policing, where are we getting the data? And is it just a feedback loop where, police officers already monitor, areas that are disproportionately Black and brown, and because that's where they're looking, that's where they're finding stuff. And then that feeds into the data, that becomes the data. And then the data tell them, well, you should go back to this community. And so, are we really just kind of going through a cycle on that? So technology definitely is changing, and the use of data and kind of machine learning is changing as well. Was there anybody else who wanted to share how they are revising their curriculum?
I can jump in for a quick second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Mo Miller. I'm new to this side of the teaching because I'm usually juvenile justice and intro, but I just got approved to teach the race, inequality, and the criminal justice. And I felt like the first thing I needed to do was work on myself. So what are my implicit biases? How do I view the police growing up in West Oakland, California? How did I manage my relationships with the police, being an African American woman in society? So took a lot of bias classes, inequality workshops, just preparing myself for the conversation. But the one thing that I decided to do in that same class was to, introduce Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and basically have those conversations on a historical level, but definitely work through, preparing our students for whether they want to go to grad school or even have this job. How do I give them the leadership skills to see the systemic issues that are in the system, and how to have a positive outlook of changing that? Because you're right, we can't go in with, well, I never did. I'm sorry, I didn't go in with Robert Peel. I mean, I taught Robert Peel, but then I backed up to, what did W.E.B. Du Bois say about this? Or, what was the purpose of Jim Crow laws? I added that, but I think it's really important for us as criminal justice instructors to make sure when we come to the classroom, we're as educated about our own biases and where we fit in this conversation before we even address our students, because we're going to be dealing with trauma. We're going to be dealing with reintegration from this pandemic. We got we know the social issues. So just make sure we're all, educated and stored up before we come to the classroom. I think that's the biggest change I've made as far as my pedagogy is going to be concerned, is that I'm ready to go. And I'm going to continue to learn as I have every semester.
I love that. Everything you said is fantastic. That's really awesome. And yeah, I mean, that kind of speaks to, what I ended on with the positionality idea. I think it's fantastic that that's exactly where you started, was, how am I viewing this? And I don't know that it's biased per se. It's just we all see the world through our own eyes. And so, by definition, we create kind of our own perception of what reality is. And so just being able to kind of step back and recognize, like, this is how I understand something to be, but that's not necessarily how somebody else experiences this same, quote unquote reality, is really, half of it. And I'm with you too. I mean, the first week or two of my policing class, I assign articles about redlining, predatory mortgage lending, and my students at first are like, I think you got confused. You don't know what class you're in. But I explained to them, you're not going to understand what's happening in policing until you understand, why we have this, why we ended up in the position, that we're in, and structurally, socioeconomically. And so I love that you go all the way back to Du Bois and others who have commented early on, because we're still having the same conversations. Goodness, so many of the things written in the 1800s are still applicable. It's sad, but it also, I think, we can. I'm sorry, the chat is going here. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I want to hear more from you guys. But I think that there is some optimism in that. Things have definitely gotten better over the past few decades. They 100% have, and so that, again, that's not to say that we're good now. We don't have to worry about it anymore. What it proves, though, is that improvement is possible. Change is possible. We know that because we've seen it. So that's kind of how I try to conceptualize that for my students as well, is we have seen improvement happen. Therefore, we can see continued improvement in the future. I know there's a lot going on in the chat. Josh, I'm going to defer to you on that.
Yeah. One question that just came up fairly recently was, and again, I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, but Melchor de Guzman. As a scholar, do you think that police scholarship is tilted toward technology instead of the hot button issues of race?
I think you'd have to do a cataloging of the stuff that's getting published. I mean, as a reviewer, I see a lot of race pieces go by because I get asked to review them. And so, my view is skewed in that direction. And I'm also the editor of a journal called Race and Justice. So clearly I see plenty of race manuscripts go through there. So maybe, but I publish stuff on race, and I don't have problems, getting with that. So, I'm gonna say that I don't have a number there, and that maybe a systematic review of the policing research would answer that.
The other thing that someone asked about is actually syllabus. If someone has a syllabus they would mind sharing, and by all means, that's one of the things this workshop or these workshops are for, so you can connect with each other. So by all means, if someone has syllabus or ideas of class activities, things of that nature, they wouldn't mind sharing. That would be great. The other question that I saw is someone asking about a student who comes from a family of an LE and wants to be a cop plus the social justice advocate in the same class. It's difficult to figure out how to discuss topics such as this without causing one of these students to just immediately tune you out. I think you and I on the phone, Jacinta, talked about the issue at Cypress College, what we saw there with it becoming a direct conflict between a student and an instructor. Just how do you sort of steer around that? And I think you had some great thoughts on that yesterday when we talked about this.
Well, yet again, somebody is psychic or is hacked into my slides. So yeah, what I'm going to recommend to this is trying to dig into both of those positions and use things like examples. Okay, tell me why you're wearing a Blue Lives Matter shirt. Give me an example of a really positive interaction you have had with a police officer, or why do you want to become a police officer, and so and then from there, that is an opportunity to open it up. Okay, here's somebody who exemplifies a positive interaction with police. Is somebody else willing to share a different type of interaction? Maybe somebody in here has had a really bad interaction with police. Would you like to talk about that? And so moving beyond like broad statements of opinion or advocacy, and kind of drilling down into, well, what's behind that? And you're not necessarily going to get any agreement, but you might at least see overlap, that can be used to say, well, there are very differing perspectives here, but at the core of it, there are some similarities, or at least there are ways that they can kind of, connect and understand, and kind of understand each other. I'm going to get into that a little bit more later in the discussion as well, although I guess we're almost done.
Yeah, we're running short on time. And so if you want to continue on with your PowerPoint presentation, I know you had some more points to make. I'll continue to monitor what's coming in, and we can discuss this stuff, as we go along.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because maybe I'll be able to actually address some of these questions before they're even answered, potentially. So tackling and managing controversy. I'll go through this fairly quickly. Again, if anybody wants a copy of the slides, feel free to email me, and I'll certainly send them to you. Or I don't know if maybe they're being posted. But yeah, so job security, as somebody in the noted, school boards and states putting restrictions into place. There's a lot of absolute fear, and there's a lot of understandable fear, and you don't want your students raising a fuss about things. You don't want them complaining or anything like that. But again, this could really come back to bite us for the reasons that one, your lectures might come across as dry, boring, or tone deaf. You're missing an opportunity to be a resource for students as well. I think I'm going to skip down to here, because this seemed to be where people were largely talking about how do we do this? It's all well and good to talk about it. How do we do this? And so you're 100%, I think it's great to think about, what are you going to do if you get a student who is, I come from a cop family. I want to be a cop. I love cops. And, right next to him is a, somebody in a Black Lives Matter shirt who's very critical of police. What do you do if they start to, have some tension? And as my, previous answer was, try to get some details. Let's get to the heart of this. Maybe this is an opportunity for students in general to share some stories. There's just a really, really diverse variety of experiences that people have with police. And so, recognizing that variation, humanizing people who hold different views, and really have an lasting emotional effect on somebody. It humanizes the other side. We all live in those silos, those echo chambers. Not all of us, but a lot of us live in those silos or echo chambers, and we only hear from people who already think like us. And so, I think trying, and it's not an easy task, I'm not trying to minimize it, but trying to view that sort of setup not as something to be afraid of, but as an opportunity. These two students would never come in contact with each other in any other circumstance, but here they are in your classroom. What an amazing opportunity that is for both of them to hear from each other. That is something that just wouldn't happen otherwise. So maybe just viewing it as a really great chance for this dialogue to take place. And then, as somebody else already alluded to as well, recognizing that there's validity in kind of these two perspectives. There is serious systemic racism in policing. Let me just say that and be clear. There are serious systemic problems, and they have to be addressed. They have to. But that's different than saying all cops are bad. That's different from saying that cops are just out there to bully people. And there's a lot of good that police do every day, and most of it goes unacknowledged because nobody puts the officer on the 5 o'clock news who did something right. And so it's really important to where there is validity. I'm not saying do the artificial equivalence. Don't do that. Where there is validity, though, in a perspective, acknowledge that validity. I think that's really important. So like validating, like my example is, well, maybe the kid wearing a Blue Lives Matter t-shirt, well, maybe his dad is a cop, and he's really a big fan of, his dad is like his role model, or his mom is his role model, and he really, he really feels strongly about, following in his mom or dad's footsteps, and he's proud, and maybe that's where that Blue Lives Matter shirt comes from. And so, we can all get on board with that, with being proud of your parents and, wanting to follow in their footsteps. And so maybe there's not such a vast gap after all, if we find out where that belief is coming from. So that's kind of where I'll wrap it up. But that's kind of where my drill down into it, dig into it comment is coming from, because when you ask for facts and experiences and specifics, sometimes you find surprising things. So I'll turn it back over to questions, answers, comments. I really want to hear from everybody else. I see a comment about race of instructor, and I like that you put that in there. That's, as you've probably figured out by now, I am white. If there was any dispute or ambiguity, element of and so certainly I think that it's tough. You don't want to it's tough. I think that going back to, I'm sorry I didn't catch her name, but going back to the person who shared earlier, that being aware, what is my kind of demographic background, and therefore what am I potentially bringing to this? How am I going to see things differently than people of other races or genders or LGBTQ plus status? Like what, how does my positionality influence, kind of what I'm going to bring to instruction? And it's not about feeling biased or anything, I don't think, unless you do find yourself checking some biases, which is always a good thing, if you can catch those. But, I don't think that we should, the instructor race does matter, but I don't think we should limit it by race. I think that we should just acknowledge that that's a variable.
Jacinta, there's a lot of folks asking for the PowerPoint presentation. I'm writing down all the emails so we can get the PowerPoint presentation out to these folks that want it, if that's okay with you. So I'm kind of keeping a recording of that. Trying to see if there's any other questions that we haven't answered. I know someone else wants a PowerPoint presentation. It was just a terrific presentation. it is obviously a very difficult discussion to have and a difficult thing to bring up in the classroom. And it's not just you as the instructor having these conversations and difficulty with these conversations with students. For instance, for us as a publisher, we are all the time asking you all for feedback, and that's why us being able to host this, all of you being able to participate, is so informative for us. To talk about what we should be publishing in the future, what we should be looking for, ideas, those things of that nature. And it's a conversation we have all the time of, in a book, is a book too leaning towards the practitioner, the former policeman who's now teaching, and is a pro-police approach versus something that's critical. How is there balance there? Where should we go? How critical is too critical? Those are all questions that people give us and ask us and things of that nature. So just having participation from all of you is so instrumental in what we're able to put out there as a publisher to then support you in the teaching of things of this nature.
There's a lot of people, sorry, I don't know my internet just started flipping out on me here. There's a lot of people are asking for the slides. Can I just send them to you, Josh, for posting on? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Just send them to me and I'll distribute them to everyone here.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, anybody who wants a copy of the slides is certainly welcome to do that. And I know we have a lot. Yeah, I love this last question, but I know we're almost at time. How do you approach teaching non-traditional white male police officer students? We have some at our university. They seem to take immediate defense to anything discussing systemic racism. I hear you. I've had those students in class. I think there's a couple different strategies. One, remind them that you're not attacking them. That they're, again, we're going to talk about the institution of policing. Yes, we are going to talk about officers who make mistakes, either horrible accidents that just should not be happening, or intentionally intentional things like what happened to George Floyd. But this is not an attack on every single individual officer. So I think just trying to set the tone. It's not going to work with everybody, but trying to set the tone. This is not an attack on you. We are talking about broader themes, broader problems. If they can't quite buy it, then trying to contain them as much as possible. I know that some of them really want to be vocal. You're going to have to put your foot down and not let them sort of derail or hijack your class. And frankly, if those two things fail, I would recommend a discussion about how they might take the class from somebody else at some other time, if they are going to be a persistent headache to you, and if they're going to hold back the class and prevent you from accomplishing your pedagogical goals.
And I know we're about out of time. I just wanted to again thank everybody for joining. How much discussion there was. It's really sometimes a challenge to get a lot of engagement, but really appreciate everybody. And again, this is a chance for you all to connect with each other. So those have asked me for the PowerPoint presentation. I'll be happy to send that. The other thing that I put in the chat is, if you have a syllabus, I think someone else, and I apologize for not catching the name, but someone else said they had their students in Georgia do journal entries. Maybe you have a class that's smaller, so you can use that as an assignment, but do journal entries so they can, in a safe space, in a safe way, talk about bias that they may have, and examine that as they're going through the class. If you have activities like that and you don't mind everyone else sort of sharing in that and being willing to use that, share them with me. You've got my email address from the reminder. I'll be happy to share that with anybody who wants it, as well as a syllabus. If you have that and you find effective ways to have these conversations in your class, I will share your syllabus with everyone who wants it, those sorts of things, because that's what the goal of this workshop, this series of workshops is so everyone has been able to participate, but also support each other, spread ideas, that sort of thing. And Jacinta, you're on mute, so if you want to come off mute, maybe to sign off here.
Sorry. I did the classic mute. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I put my email address in the chat. Please feel free to reach out if you want to further the conversation. And you know, I'd love to hear what other people are doing as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all very much. If you still have questions, send them to me. Send them. I'll distribute them to Jacinta. But again, ideas, things of that nature that people can benefit from, I'd be happy to facilitate that. Just again, thanks to everyone. Again, we've got 2 more of these workshops in this series coming up, so please check your email. And obviously, those of you that have responded with us or communicated with us, you'll have that schedule. And then finally, in the email invite, there's a chance to go to the survey. We want you to get your certificate for participating today. So if you would go through the links, the process you need to do to go through SurveyMonkey to complete that survey and get your certificate. And if you have any issues with that, please let me know. In case you didn't catch it, my email address is joshua.perigo. That's PERIGO @sagepub.com. So thank you all. And Jacinta, thank you so much for a great presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have an excellent evening.